They didn't find the bodies first. They found the bins, a red pickup truck, parked for days inside the Albuquerque International Sunport garage, carried something so foul that security guards called police just to check for a dead animal. When officers pried the tarp open, what they saw stopped them cold. Plastic storage bins, blood, and what looked like human remains. Before that discovery, no one connected the missing people in Grants, New Mexico, a 21-year-old man named Matthew Miller, a woman named Jennifer Lannon, and her boyfriend, Justin Mata. In a town of fewer than 10,000, disappearances weren't unheard of, but 3 in 1 month was too many. Each story began the same way. Missed calls, unanswered texts, families begging for help. Matthew's grandmother was the first to report it. He'd struggled with addiction, but he always called her. Now it had been more than 2 weeks. Detective Chris Turney took the report. He'd seen every kind of case, runaways, overdoses, fugitives, but this one unsettled him. Matthew's phone was dead, his bank card untouched, his truck nowhere to be found. When officers eventually located the vehicle parked outside the Leach apartments, it looked abandoned. No blood, no struggle, just a locked truck sitting in silence. The address led them to a woman named Leonie, who claimed she hadn't seen Matthew in over a year. Turney knew a lie when he heard one. Later that week, surveillance footage surfaced. Matthew's truck parked right outside her house on January 26th. Caught on camera, contradicting everything she'd said. When confronted, Leonie changed her story again. She said if Matthew had been there, he was visiting her fiancé, Justin Mata, and Justin, she explained, had left town with his girlfriend, Jennifer Lannon. That name rang familiar. Jennifer's family had just called from New Jersey, saying she'd gone silent 3 weeks earlier. No calls, no texts, not even check on her 3 children, who lived with her ex-husband, Shawn Lannon. Now 3 people were gone, and all of them somehow linked. Detectives traced Jennifer's phone. The signal went dead near Grant's. Her car was gone. Her family was desperate. Police turned to the one person who might know where she went, the ex-husband. Shawn Lannon arrived at the station calm, polite, composed. He said Jennifer had run off with Justin and a man named Matt. He said she'd stop by occasionally to grab belongings. He said everything in that tired, rehearsed way that makes detectives listen harder. Lannon told him he'd borrowed Matthew's truck weeks earlier to take his kids to McDonald's. He smiled when he said it, but Turney underlined that sentence in his notes, because just hours later, surveillance video placed that same red truck outside Shawn's old house on Keeman Avenue, the same week the disappearances began. By then, the story was no longer a coincidence. Lannon had lived in that house with Jennifer before their separation. He'd been evicted for not paying rent. And now, that quiet house on Keeman Avenue sat empty, its carpet torn up, its room silent. Police suspected he knew more than he was saying, but they had no proof. He wasn't charged. Not yet. Weeks passed. Families waited by the phone. Grants grew restless. Rumors spread that Jennifer had relapsed, that Justin had taken off, that Matthew had overdosed somewhere. But none of their bank accounts moved, and none of their phones turned back on. Then, on March 5, 2021, that call came from the Albuquerque airport. A red Ford Ranger. Parked for days. Something leaking. Something smelling. When detectives opened the bins, they found the bodies of Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller, and one man no one recognized, Randall Apostolon, 60 years old, who had been missing only a few days earlier. Investigators traced the truck's registration. It belonged to Randall, and the last person seen driving it was Shawn Lannon. In a single moment, 3 missing person cases became a quadruple homicide. The search for the living turned into a search for understanding. Who was Shawn Lannon? The quiet father who dropped his kid at school, volunteered to help find his ex-wife, and spoke of her in the past tense. Detective Turney replayed his interview again and again. The calmness, the control, the tiny cracks when he was asked about Matthew's truck. Everything had led back to him from the start. The addresses, the vehicles, the silence. Grants, New Mexico, a place where people still left their doors unlocked, had become the center of one of the darkest investigations in state history. The evidence wasn't telling a story of drugs or chance. It was leading to something calculated, deliberate, and very personal. Soon, detectives would bring Shawn Lannon back into that same interrogation room. And when they did, he would lean forward, look them straight in the eye, and begin his confession with the same cold words that opened this story. "Step one," he said, "is to tell me where the bodies are." To everyone who knew him, Shawn Lannon seemed harmless, soft-spoken, polite, devoted to his children. He wasn't the kind of man people feared. He was the kind they trusted without realizing why. After the discovery in the Albuquerque airport garage, detectives in 2 states began retracing every mile of his life. The more they looked, the stranger it became. Shawn wasn't hiding. He was at home in Albuquerque, living with his 3 young children as if nothing had happened. Neighbors saw him taking out trash, chatting about school schedules, borrowing tools. When reporters asked later what they remembered, they said he looked normal. Quiet, maybe too quiet. Police already had footage linking him to the red Ford Ranger, the same truck that held 4 bodies. That was enough to bring him in again. But the conversation that followed would only deepen the mystery. Detective Chris Turney, the same man who'd taken the first missing person report weeks earlier, sat across from him in the interview room. Turney laid out the facts. Jennifer was gone. Justin was gone. Matthew was gone. Randall's truck was found at the airport with bodies inside. Lannon listened without flinching. He didn't deny knowing them. He didn't even ask who was dead. He simply said, "I don't know what happened to them." Turney pressed. Lannon's answers circled back to addiction, to the bad crowd Jennifer had fallen in with. He mentioned a man named Danny, known on the street as Dog, describing him as dangerous, unpredictable, someone who might have hurt them. But the more he talked, the more his story bent under its own weight. Surveillance cameras didn't show Danny. They showed Shawn. They showed him parking the truck near the Leach apartments. They showed him walking away alone. Police didn't yet know how much to believe. They didn't even know how the victims had died. What they did know was that the same man who sat calmly before them had lied about nearly every part of his timeline. Outside the interview room, word of the discovery spread fast. In small towns like Grant's, news doesn't travel, it detonates. People who'd once invited Shawn to barbecues now spoke his name in whispers. Parents who'd waved him at school pickups began checking their locks at night. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the truck. Inside the plastic bins, they found blood-soaked bedding, duct tape, and hand tools. The condition of the remains left no doubt this was homicide. Autopsies would later confirm the worst. Jennifer, Justin, and Matthew had been killed by gunshot wounds and dismembered before being placed in the containers. Randall, the truck's owner, had suffered massive head trauma from a blunt object. A hammer, most likely. That single detail would become important later. But in early March 2021, the picture was still forming. Investigators began connecting Lannon's financial records, tracing his movements, interviewing anyone who'd seen him between January and March. What emerged was a pattern of quiet control. In January, Shawn was still living on Kingman Avenue in Grants, the house he once shared with Jennifer. In February, he was evicted for unpaid rent. Neighbors saw him hauling heavy bins into a truck days before the eviction notice took effect. In March, he was in Albuquerque, living with a friend named Diana, caring for his children, and keeping his secret sealed in plastic just a few miles away. Detectives issued an alert to track him, but before they could make another move, Lannon disappeared. By the time the Albuquerque police returned to arrest him on an unrelated battery warrant, he was gone. For investigators, it felt like watching a shadow slip through the cracks. In truth, Lannon was already moving east, traveling more than 1,800 miles with his children to Gloucester County, New Jersey, where his mother still lived. It was the same place he'd grown up, the same place where people still thought him as the polite boy who joined the army. As he drove, detectives in New Mexico were still piecing together what they had: the picture of the red truck, the torn carpet from a house on Kingman Avenue, surveillance timestamps that formed a perfect line from Grant to Albuquerque to the airport garage. Every clue pointed to one conclusion: the man who'd reported his ex-wife missing had murdered her and at least 3 others. But without a confession, it was still just evidence. And somewhere on the other side of the country, that same man was about to kill again. In New Jersey, Lannon reunited briefly with family. He said he needed to get back on his feet. He told his mother he planned to find work, maybe reconnect with an old mentor from his childhood, a man named Michael Dubkowski, who had once been his big brother, through a local youth program. He called him. They met. Hours later, Michael stopped answering his phone. When police in East Greenwich Township performed a welfare check, they found blood pooling under the garage door and the body of 66-year-old Michael Dubkowski inside, beaten to death with a hammer. That same night, detectives back in New Mexico finally got confirmation that the red Ford Ranger at the airport was connected to Shawn Lannon. By dawn, 2 states were searching for him. The father who claimed to love his children more than anything had now killed 5 people in less than 2 months and was still on the run. But the truth about why he did it and what he believed he was avenging was darker than anyone imagined. And when detectives finally caught up with him in St. Louis, Missouri, Lannon didn't run. He didn't beg. He just looked up, calm as ever, and told him the same words he'd told Detective Turney back in New Mexico. Step 1, he said again, is to tell me where the bodies are. In the end, it wasn't police work that exposed him. It was a smell. Late on the night of March 4th, 2021, a security officer patrolling the multi-level garage at Albuquerque International Sunport noticed a red Ford Ranger parked crookedly in a corner space. It had been there for days. Nothing about the truck seemed special until he walked past its tailgate and caught something sharp in the air, a dense, metallic odor that clung to the concrete. He radioed for another guard. Together, they looked through the window. Inside were storage totes, stacked neatly, lids sealed with duct tape. They saw a smear on the plastic and thought maybe it was rust. When they cracked the tailgate for a closer look, the odor rolled out and settled over everything. One of them whispered, "That's not an animal." The airport police were called, then city officers, then detectives. Within an hour, the garage had become a sealed crime scene. The investigation that had begun as 3 missing person reports in a small New Mexico town had just crossed into one of the most gruesome homicide discoveries in state history. Detectives opened the bins one by one. Inside the first was a female body, intact but bound in sheets. In another, the torso of a man. In a third, a second male torso, a knife blade still protruding from the ribcage. There were blood-stained hand tools scattered among them. Crime scene technicians moved in slowly, documenting every inch. The red truck itself traced back to Randall Apostolon, a 60-year-old local who had been reported missing only days earlier. His family told investigators Randall had been living out of the same vehicle. He'd struggled with addiction, drifted from job to job, but he always checked in. Then one day he stopped. At first, police thought Randall was just another victim of circumstance, a man killed and stuffed into his own truck by whoever had also murdered the 3 Grants residents. But when they traced the path of the vehicle through toll cameras and security feeds, a single pattern emerged. Every location touched by the truck had already been tied to Shawn Lannon. The same Red Ranger was captured, leaving his Albuquerque apartment complex. The same license plate appeared entering the Sunport garage on March 2nd at 10:47 p.m. A lone figure stepped out, wearing a hoodie, head down, walking toward the elevator. Detective Turney recognized the walk immediately. In Grants, he and his team were still dissecting Lannon's earlier interview. He claimed he last drove Matthew Miller's truck in January, that he hadn't seen Jennifer since she left with Justin. Yet now, forensic evidence placed him behind the wheel of a different vehicle altogether, one loaded with human remains. Within hours, investigators in Albuquerque and Grants merged their cases. Search warrants were drawn for Lannon's prior residence on Kingman Avenue. What they found inside suggested that the killings had not been spontaneous. The carpet in one bedroom had been ripped up. Underneath, traces of blood. Sections of flooring had been replaced. A vent cover in the hallway bore a rust-colored stain that tested positive for human DNA. The smell of bleach still hung in the air. Neighbors recalled seeing Shawn hauling large plastic bins into a pickup during the last week of February, the same kind now sitting in the airport garage. They thought he was moving out. He even waved goodbye. Now, forensic analysts matched tool marks on the bins to instruments found in his house. A reciprocating saw, a hammer, heavy-duty tape. The precision of it all unsettled the investigators. This wasn't panic or rage. It was order. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in New Jersey, detectives were discovering the body of Michael Dubkovsky, the retired mentor who had taken Lannon under his wing as a child. Beaten with a hammer, face covered, wallet missing. Lannon's name surfaced there too. By March 10th, U.S. Marshals tracked his phone to St. Louis, Missouri. He was arrested quietly in a parking lot, his 3 children in the back seat, driving the stolen car belonging to Dubkovsky. Inside the vehicle were a hammer and clothing stained with blood. When agents approached, Lannon didn't resist. He raised his hands, calm and polite. One of them later said it was like arresting a man already prepared to surrender. At the Albuquerque evidence yard, investigators continued cataloging the contents of the red truck. Inside the cab, beneath the passenger seat, they found a tarp wrapped around a 5th body, male, severe head trauma. It was Randall Apostolon. The autopsy confirmed what the hammer marks had already told them. The bins contained Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, and Matthew Miller. The 4th and 5th victims, Randall Apostolon and Michael Dubkovsky, tied the story together from New Mexico to New Jersey. When news broke, it stunned both states. Jennifer's family in New Jersey turned on the television and saw their daughter's name scroll across the screen. They'd hoped she was in rehab, not in a truck 2,000 miles away. Detective Turney knew what would come next. The suspect would either deny everything or talk endlessly. With Shawn Lannon, there would be no middle ground. Back in custody, he sat through booking with the same composure he'd shown weeks earlier. When investigators asked if he understood why he was being detained, he nodded once. "Yes," he said, "because of the people in the truck." Then he paused, looking almost curious. "Do you know about the others?" It was a first hint of what he would claim later. That 5 bodies were only the beginning. For detectives who had already seen the bins, it was hard to imagine what others could mean. But when the interview began, Lannon's tone never changed. No trembling voice, no remorse, no shock. Just a man explaining the unexplainable in the same even rhythm he used when describing his morning routine. He told them about Jennifer, about the people she'd been with, about debts, betrayal, and sin. He spoke like someone giving testimony, not a confession. Each word drew the investigators deeper into the psychological maze that had started in Grants and stretched across the country. The bins at the airport had ended the search for the missing, but they had opened a different search, for motive, for meaning, for the mind that could turn family, friends, and strangers into evidence. And when the detective finally asked him what step 2 was, after telling them where the bodies were, Lannon gave an answer that none of them forgot. "Step 2, he said, "is to tell you why." When the detectives finally faced him again, the evidence was ready, just not the story. The bins had been cataloged, the fingerprints confirmed, the carpet fibers matched. But what still made no sense was motive. Shawn Lannon sat in the interview room, chained at the wrist, calm as if waiting for a meeting. Across from him, Detective Chris Turney spread the photos. The red Ford Ranger, the plastic totes, the hammer, the stains beneath the bedroom floor. Turney didn't start with pleasantries. "The things you've told us," he said quietly, "are lies." Lannon didn't blink. He stared down at the table, expression flat, almost bored. Turney pressed harder. "You're the last person to drive Matthew Miller's truck. You parked it where we found it. You lied about that. Why?" For a moment, nothing. Then Lannon nodded, as though the question was reasonable. "I parked it there," he said. "That's where Justin told me to put it." The answer hung in the air, suspended between confession and deflection. Turney leaned forward. "Justin's dead, Shawn." "I know," he said. It was the first unguarded thing he'd said all day. As the interview went on, Lannon began to unwind the threads of his double life. He admitted moving the truck. He admitted hiding a gun and a bag at the home of a woman named Kelly, his former girlfriend. He admitted smashing his phone after speaking to police. But every admission came wrapped in excuses. He was protecting someone. He was scared. He was being framed by a dog. Turney didn't believe a word of it. He had seen the surveillance, the timestamps, the footage of Lannon walking calmly away from the airport garage. Everything pointed back to him. Then came the moment that changed the case entirely. Turney said, "Step one is to tell me where the bodies are." Lannon looked up slowly. "They're in the truck." It was the first time he spoke about the bins without hesitation. Turney kept his tone steady. "Step two was to tell me why." Lannon exhaled, long and tired. "Because of what they did." He didn't elaborate, not yet. But what followed over the next hours would spiral into one of the most chilling confessions New Mexico investigators had ever heard. He started with Jennifer, his ex-wife. He said he found her unconscious in their home with their 3 children, all barely breathing. He claimed that she and Justin Mata had given the children heroin, blown the smoke into their faces to make them sleep. Lannon said he revived them with Narcan, but not Jennifer. "She kissed the kids," he said, and said, "I'll see you in a minute." Then she used again. He told detectives that she died of an overdose while he held her. That's when he decided to kill Justin. According to Lannon, he lured Justin back to the house a week later under the pretense of reconciliation. He claimed Justin confessed to taking explicit photos of one of the children and another man, Matthew Miller. Then Lannon said he shot him in the back of the head. His voice never wavered as he described it. He told them he shot Matthew next, also in the head, after confronting him about the same accusation. Detectives listened in silence. They had no evidence of any such photographs, no record of abuse, no indication from any prior investigation that the claims were true. But Lannon's story flowed with mechanical precision. Each killing presented as retaliation, each victim cast as a villain. He said he dismembered the bodies to make them fit. He said he placed them in bins because he couldn't stand the smell. He said he stored them in a friend's SUV, then later in his apartment parking lot in Albuquerque, waiting for a way to dispose of them. When that SUV's owner demanded it back, he found another solution. A man he barely knew, Randall Apostolon, offered to help him move the bins in his red Ford Ranger for a fee. But Lannon said Randall became suspicious, threatened to tell someone, and demanded more money. "I hit him," Lannon said simply. "Then I used the hammer." Turney stared at him. The calmness wasn't human. It was procedural. After the killings, Lannon drove the truck to the airport, parked it, locked it, and took a cab home. He flew to New Jersey the next morning with his 3 children. Once there, he said, he paid a visit to Michael Dubkovsky, the man who'd once been his big brother in a youth mentorship program. He told detectives he confronted him about alleged abuse from decades earlier. When Dubkovsky denied it, Lannon said, "I hit him too." He smiled faintly when he said it. By the time the confession ended, detectives had 5 confirmed victims. But even as Turney prepared to close the interview, Lannon said something that froze him in place. "What about the other 11? Turney frowned. "What other 11? Lannon leaned back in his chair, eyes flat and distant. "The ones in the lava tubes," he said. For a moment, no one spoke. He was referring to El Malpais, the vast volcanic field outside Grants, filled with treacherous lava caves known as the Badlands. He told them he'd been killing people there for years. Drug dealers, users, anyone he believed had hurt Jennifer. He said he dumped their bodies in lava tubes or dissolved them in acid tanks at an oil refinery. Investigators could find no evidence of these claims. No missing person reports, no remains, no proof that anyone besides the 5 already identified had died at his hands. But the ease with which he said it, the casual tone, made them wonder if it mattered whether it was true or not. In his mind, it was... Turney ended the session after 9 hours. As officers led Lannon from the room, he turned back to the detective and said softly, "It's done now. You'll find what you're meant to find." That night, Turney wrote in his notes, he doesn't kill from impulse. He kills to justify belief. The case that began with missing addicts and Grants had ended with a father who believed he was cleansing the world. And for investigators, the most haunting part wasn't what he'd done. It was how calmly he'd made them understand it. When the interrogation ended, the room stayed heavy with the weight of his words. The others, 11 more, hidden somewhere in the lava fields of western New Mexico. Detective Chris Turney stared at the report for hours after Shawn Lannon's confession ended. He had spent his career separating truth from delusion, but this was different. The story Lannon told wasn't chaotic. It was measured. It sounded like something he believed. He said he'd killed drug dealers and users who hurt Jennifer. He said the lava caves at El Malpais National Monument were perfect for hiding bodies. The park was a labyrinth of black rock and collapsed tunnels, sharp as glass and colder than stone. You needed a caving permit to enter. Even then, rangers warned that going alone was suicide. Lannon said he'd walked into those caves carrying plastic sheeting and garbage bags. He said he dropped them where the light disappears. Investigators knew enough about his precision to be afraid that it could be true. For days, search teams combed the Badlands west of Grants, tracing the volcanic tubes he'd named. They brought dogs, drones, and caving experts. They found bones, animal bones, old mining tools, relics from hikers, but no human remains. Nothing matched the 11. Lannon's credibility eroded fast. His details shifted between interviews. One day, the bodies were in the lava tubes. Another day, dissolved in acid tanks at a refinery where he once worked. When asked for names, he gave none. It left detectives with a grim choice. Treat him as a serial killer whose other victims may never be found, or as a man trying to mythologize his crimes into something larger. They chose both. Behind the scenes, they mapped his life. Military records confirmed he had served 5 years in the U.S. Army, stationed in Kosovo during the late 1990s peacekeeping operations. His mother said he came back changed, not angry, she told them, just hollow. He told her once that there could be no God after what he'd seen. Whatever that meant in war, it became literal at home. The people closest to him described 2 versions of Shawn Lannon, the devoted father and the haunted one. He'd swing from calm domestic routines to staring out the window for hours. He would talk about ghosts in the house. 3 of them, he said, a little girl, Jennifer's grandmother, and someone else who came for him. His mother dismissed it as exhaustion. But when he arrived in New Jersey after the killings, she saw something different, something deliberate. He told her he was looking for closure. He told his sister he was going to meet Michael Dubkovsky, the mentor who had guided him as a boy through the Big Brothers program. That visit ended with Dubkovsky's murder. When the detectives in New Mexico learned of the New Jersey killing, they saw a pattern that stretched beyond any addiction or jealousy. It was ritualistic, a purge of the past. He killed his wife because he believed she had corrupted their children. He killed Justin because he said Justin made her worse. He killed Matthew because he believed he was part of it. He killed Randall because he threatened to expose him. And he killed Michael because he said Michael had corrupted him. Each killing closed a loop in his own invented theology. The problem was not one of his justifications could be proven. Toxicology reports showed Jennifer had opioids in her system, but not enough to suggest she had overdosed the children. There were no explicit photos, no signs of abuse, no evidence of drugging. The stories he told were constructs, ways to turn his guilt into vengeance. When confronted with this, Lannon didn't argue. He simply said, I know what I saw. Psychologists called it moral delusion, a fractured sense of righteousness that gives murder the texture of duty. In every interview, Lannon was calm. He spoke about killing as though it were an administrative process. He described the saw, the hammer, the tarp, the bleach. He never used words like victim or body. He called them or the pieces. By then, prosecutors in both states were coordinating. New Mexico charged him with 4 counts of murder and evidence tampering. New Jersey filed its own for the killing of Dubkovsky. When Lannon's case reached court, the public saw the same man who'd sat in those interviews. Soft voice, downcast eyes, never raising his tone. He pleaded not guilty at first, then changed it to guilty as part of a plea deal. His charges were reduced from first-degree to second-degree murder in New Mexico in exchange for full cooperation. The tampering counts were dropped. He received 15 years for each of the 4 murders, a total of 60 years. In New Jersey, he received 35 years for Dubkovsky's killing. Combined, the sentences ensured he would never leave prison. Reporters noted that he never asked for mercy. He only asked that his children be safe. Today, Shawn Lannon sits at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, serving his time. His children live with Jennifer's brother, Christopher. The case files from New Mexico remain open, not for the 5 confirmed murders, but for the claim of 11 more. Every year, rangers at El Malpais find bones and report them to state police. Every year, they test and rule them out. No additional victims have ever been found. Still, among detectives, the number lingers. 11, not because they believe it, but because of how naturally he said it. By the time the courtroom doors opened for sentencing, there was no mystery left to solve, only silence to confront. Shawn Lannon, age 47, entered without looking at the gallery. His head was shaved, his posture still military straight, the same composure he'd carried from interrogation to trial. He didn't glance toward Jennifer's family in the first row, didn't acknowledge the cameras. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he nodded once. It was the same stillness that had unnerved detectives from the beginning, a calm so absolute it felt rehearsed. The prosecutor read the record aloud. 5 confirmed murders across 2 states. Jennifer Lannon, 39, Justin Mata, 40, Matthew Miller, 21, Randall Apostolon, 60, Michael Dubkovsky, 66. Each life ended within a span of weeks in early 2021. Families listened, eyes fixed on the man who had moved among them for years, pretending to be ordinary. When Jennifer's mother spoke, her voice shook but didn't break. He took away my daughter, my grandchildren's mother, and the man she once trusted most. What gave him the right? Lannon didn't lift his eyes. The judge handed down the terms carefully. 15 years for each of the 4 murders in New Mexico, 60 total, plus 35 years for the killing in New Jersey. 95 years. No possibility of parole until his 80s. He offered no plea for forgiveness, only a monotone final statement. I'm sorry for destroying lives, especially my children's. I can't take it back. That was all. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Jennifer's brother what justice meant after so much loss. He said, "There's no justice. There's only an ending." Back in Grants, the investigation closed, but its shadow stayed. The small desert town that had once seen Lannon as a quiet neighbor now remembered him as a ghost who'd walked its streets. Residents still point out the Kingman Avenue house, the one where the carpet was torn out, where bleach stains marked the floorboards, where 3 people vanished without a sound. Detective Chris Turney retired not long after the case. He never forgot the first interview, the moment Lannon looked at him and said, "Step 1 is to tell me where the bodies are." He'd replayed that sentence too many times, wondering when exactly Lannon decided to become what he became. Some believe the violence began in Kosovo, when Lannon was a young soldier witnessing mass graves and the aftermath of war. Others thought it started long before, in childhood, buried beneath trauma he never spoke of until it became the justification for murder. In the end, no psychological report could fully explain him. One evaluator described him as possessing a distorted moral conviction rooted in perceived cleansing. Another called a self-authored crusade against sin. Whatever the words, they all led the same emptiness. A man who remade tragedy into purpose. After his conviction, Lannon was transferred to New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, the state's oldest maximum security facility. There he keeps mostly to himself, working in the laundry unit, rarely speaking except to chaplains. Guards say he reads the Bible but never attends service. He has refused all interviews. In New Mexico, the volcanic badlands of El Malpais still stretch for miles, black stone, broken earth, and tunnels where light dies a few feet in. Every few months, hikers stumble upon bones. Rangers call it in, police test the fragments, and each time they come back the same, animal, not human. Yet the legend persists. 11 others, he said. Whether it was fantasy, manipulation, or confession, no one knows. But the number lives on the files, a small handwritten note in Turney's case log. Possible additional victims. Verify annually. For the families left behind, what remains are questions that prison time can't answer. Why the bins? Why the lies about abuse? Why the calmness that made him seem almost proud? Some see him as the embodiment of banality, the proof that evil can look ordinary until it moves. Others think of him as a warning about what silence can conceal. In Grants, people still drive past the old airport road and remember the news helicopters circling above Albuquerque, the Red Ranger being lifted by crane, the smell that hung in the dry air for days. In New Jersey, the Dubkovsky house has been sold, renovated, repainted. The new owners know nothing about the man who once mentored a boy who would return decades later as his killer. And somewhere between those two places, between the desert and the suburbs, between devotion and delusion, sits the true story of Shawn Lannon, a father, a veteran, a murderer, a man who looked at the world and decided that vengeance was virtue. When asked once what he believed would happen to him after death, he answered quietly, almost himself, "I've already been there." The transcript ends there. The investigators packed up their notes, the files closed, the house on Kingman condemned. Only the words remain, the same sentence that began it all. "Step 1, he said, is to tell me where the bodies are." And in the silence that followed, no one was sure if he ever really stopped.